Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, welcome to this bonus episode of The Team House, joining you at the rare hour of noon. What is it? Yes, it is just after noon here in Brooklyn. Usually this show happens Friday night when we're drinking way more than we should be. So we have a very sober episode with former CIA officer Marc Polymeropoulos. This is his third appearance on the show. He is the author of Clarity in Crisis. We're really pleased to have you back on the show, Marc. Thank you for coming in.
It's great to be here. Not an evening performance, which means I got to drive back to Virginia after this. So we're gonna stay sober, which means that I don't have to have that self-hate, tomorrow morning. Like, what the hell did I say last night?
It's been really cool watching you since like right after you retired and got out to kind of like, what is this like second phase of your post-CIA life? What has that been like? What are you doing?
Well, lots of different stuff. I mean, you always kind of try to find yourself after retirement. And so, one of the things I've fallen into is kind of this leadership genre. I wrote a book, obviously, on leadership. And I've gone, and obviously I have, some private sector clients, and I talk to businesses on it. But now I've kind of jumped into the sports world. And so I was up here in New York, and it's awesome that I got the opportunity to stop in today. But I was up here talking to St. John's University baseball. And so sports teams have really kind of, gravitated towards the book because there's so many lessons in there which are really applicable to sports. So it's been really fun. And, I get a chance to kind of help mold, the young men and women in athletics and how they deal with adversity, something that I obviously dealt with a long time, but it's been a blast. So I think that's where I want to go. You never know. I still do some, commentary on foreign policy and foreign affairs. And but the sports stuff that's kind of my passion now. So it's been fun.
You're like a lifelong baseball fan, right?
Yeah. So I grew up in Jersey, and so Dee will be upset when I say this, but I'm because we did some summers up in Martha's Vineyard, so I'm a Red Sox fan.
Gross.
I am not a Yankees or Mets fan, so he's upset with me already. Gross. But I'm just crazy baseball fan. My son's playing college baseball now for a junior college down in Richmond. It's just one of my passions. But the interesting thing is that as I have kind of reflected on my career as an intelligence officer and dealing with adversity and a lot of tough times, and sometimes percentages aren't with you. Very similar to baseball. You hit 300, you're an all-star, but that means you fail 7 out of the 10 times. And so there's kind of great similarities in the two worlds. I've kind of found an interesting niche to talk about this, and so here we go. I gotta get some clients from pro sports teams. I think that'll pay more.
Okay,
that's the next step.
I can't remember if I ever mentioned this to you or not, but I had a friend once tell me that you guys were somewhere in, I think, East Africa, playing baseball, trying to knock out the windows on the Iraqi embassy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Softball. Yeah, that was that seemed like the right thing to do. I think that was that was a long time ago. I believe it was in a temporary duty assignment to Khartoum. But it seemed like the right thing to do. I was trying to hit the ball as far as possible and hit the Iraqi embassy. I don't know if we succeeded, but it was fun. So that's just good memories.
So, yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting to see all of this. And, yeah, you offer, or it seems you're still very much engaged in, like, foreign policy. Sure. And you offer a lot of commentary, and you work with a lot of people in the media. What's that been like, going from, like, being completely black?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I do not, Marc Polymeropoulos, right. Undercover.
So, it's been an interesting evolution. And when I was going to retire, I asked a couple friends of mine, former agency, senior officers, former, Deputy Director Mike Morrell or John Cipher or others that you see in the media, Doug Weiss. And I asked them, I said, what do you think of my doing this, of my kind of, coming out and actually, doing some of what you all are doing, but just, talking about the agency and talking about intelligence and kind of in the spotlight. And they actually all, like, to a T, said it's a really good idea because we need that voice.
Yeah.
And so, you obviously you abide by your secrecy agreement. But, explaining to the American people why, we need to have an intelligence organization, explaining, the importance of intelligence. And, look what's happening now in Russia, Ukraine. Intel is kind of topping the list of a tool that's being used now by the administration. But, that is only a good thing because, in the age or in the year 2022 where there's, a staggering amount of data, of open source material, like, American people got to understand why the CIA has to exist. Yeah. And if we can't explain that to them, are we going to become irrelevant down the line? So, the idea of talking openly about it, it's been fun. Sometimes, I wonder, I try to only talk about things which I had, which I worked on in the past. I mean, I remember one time that, CNN called me up and asked me to comment on an issue involving China. And I said, you know what, that's not me. I want to focus on things like, counterterrorism in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, a little bit of Russia. Things I worked on because you want to be credible. And, there, in the back of my mind, I'm always wondering, like, if my old friends, back at the agency, when they see me in the media, some might not think it's a smart idea. Some might think it's fine, but you all want them to say, well, at least Mark knows what he's talking about.
It's good to figure out what your wheelhouse is and what your own left and right limits are, because as we know, there are a lot of people out there constantly offering commentary on things they know fucking nothing about. And it's like
all the time. I always wonder, should I try to get one of those gigs, as a contributor on CNN or MSNBC or Fox? Because so often I do see folks, and sometimes it's cringeworthy. But at the same time, I only want to talk about things that I know about.
I sometimes get asked to offer commentary or even go in the media to talk about things like police shootings.
Right.
And it's like, listen, I'm not a police officer. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a civil rights expert. Like, this is not my wheelhouse. Right. I'm going to stay away from that.
You got to be authentic. You got to be credible. You might not like what I have to say, but at least you want someone to say, well, he knows what he's talking about, and that sometimes means turning stuff down.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And say, I'm not. People. I had a little bit of experience on Russia. Before I left, I was the acting operations chief for clandestine operations in Europe and Eurasia, and that included Russia. But I only did that for 2 years, so. I don't like to be included as a Russia expert. I can comment on Russia because I did it for several years. But then in the opposite, in terms of counterterrorism, South Asia and the Middle East, I can talk about that all day because that's what I did.
It's interesting being billed as an expert, isn't it? As supposedly I should be like an expert on counterterrorism through things that I did and had studied. But then again, if someone put me on the spot and asked me, Jack, can you walk me through the history of Palestinian nationalism? There would be an embarrassed silence. I wouldn't be able to do it off the cuff.
Right. I mean, so the other thing that we have to be careful on, whether you're a journalist or former military, in your case or myself as former intel, is that we're not academics. The other thing too is like I'm older, like I forget stuff, so I couldn't do that either. I mean, I've spent a lot of time doing Palestinians. But if but I'm not teaching at Columbia or any place like that, and so you just got to be. I think you got to be careful. I have a new thing I'm doing now. I'm a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council.
Okay. What does that mean? For the squares out there.
So the Atlantic Council is a very prominent, in essence, one of the DC think tanks. But as a former government official, they wanted my kind of expertise on hybrid warfare.
Okay.
And so I have to do some writing a couple times a year, do some commentary in the media, attend some conferences. But they like having former government officials there. And so, but what's interesting to me is there's also, again, I kind of go back to what I'm good at and what I know I need to work on. There's a lot of really smart people there, and sometimes I kind of worry a little bit, like should I be in this in this room, because there's super smart academics with decades of experience. Now they would counter and say, well, you're actually a practitioner, you're an operator, and so we need that. That view from kind of the street level, and I get that, and I can do that.
That was a point that Mick Mulroy brought up when he was on the show, because he went up and became in policy, White House policy. I get his title wrong every time, but he was like the deputy Middle East advisor or something of this nature at the White House. And he said, coming from being a paramilitary officer in the CIA, it's very good to have a practitioner, at least in the room with the people who are forming policy, to have that perspective there.
And I think, and that's the niche I want to play. Or sit in with the Atlantic Council, but I have to also be careful. I'm not going to give you kind of the history of Russian hybrid warfare from 1950 on. It's just, again, it's kind of having some humility, knowing what you're good at, what you're not. I certainly had a lot of humility after all my kind of ups and downs in my career, and so you got to keep that going. I mean, and the idea of doing stuff in the media, like you can't. Someone gave me some really good advice once. They said, don't do the commentary in the media to see your name in the New York Times. All the time and get excited about it. Do it to offer something unique and interesting. But if you do it just to get those TV hits, or the the press hits and prominent publications, you're doing it for the wrong reason.
Right. You just become a talking head.
Yep.
I wanted to jump into a related topic that we were talking a little bit about off camera before, is the situation that's been unfolding in recent weeks in Ukraine and some of the tensions with Russia. And we're having a conversation, which I think we both agree on, that we're kind of seeing America fight back in a way that we haven't been for quite a while, it feels like, and playing information warfare games with the Russians and kind of beating them at their own game. What do you think about some of the diplomatic signaling and messaging that has come from our government over the last few weeks?
Well, and I would say, finally, it's about damn time.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about the practice of hybrid warfare, where information operations always plays a key role. And for the first time in a long time, the U.S. is actually doing this successfully. So, and these are not intelligence leaks. These are authorized disclosures of intelligence information that is designed to kind of keep Vladimir Putin and the Russians, on edge, or kind of knock them off their game. And it's really smart. It's almost gotten into Putin's decision cycle in his head. It's also sowed a lot of probably a lot of doubt that we have penetrated his government both with human and technical means. I don't know if it's true, and it doesn't matter if it's true. Because that's what it seems like.
It just matters that he thinks it's true.
That he thinks it is, and so ultimately, it's playing, or it's finally leveling the playing field with the Russians, and I think we've done a really good job on that. So, whether an invasion is imminent or not, by saying that we know that it is imminent, that is designed to forestall an invasion. And so I think it's been done in a really smart fashion. I think. There are going to be, history books written on this, but hopefully it becomes, kind of part of a practice. If you look back to the 2014 time period, again, when we say that, actually Russia has, when Russia first invaded, this is, there was intelligence that was not released to the public, and there was a struggle, and this has been talked about in the media recently. There's a former U.S. ambassador, Mike McFaul, who's on all the time, saying he wanted to release information, but the intelligence community wouldn't do it. This time they are. So I think
doesn't the White House, the president, have the ability to declassify at will whatever intelligence he wants?
Ultimately, the president can, but you really have to have a kind of a cooperative relationship. So the DNI, Avril Haines, is the one who's doing this. She has that power as well. The DNI has that declassification authority, and so I think they've been really smart on this. And there's been some kind of talk of, do we risk, sources and methods? And I don't think so. Again, because I don't even know if this is real. If we really have penetrated. Now, the intelligence is real, but just kind of getting in Putin's head. This is brilliant, and I think they've so far they've done it successfully. I think there's probably in the media, it causes a lot of kind of hysteria is the wrong word, but a lot of concern about the imminence of an invasion.
Yes.
Well, that's for journalists to kind of decipher. It's information operations.
I definitely wanted to bring that up, and I think that's kind of like some of the boomerang effects that this has. And I was mentioning earlier, I'm a little disappointed in the way a lot of journalists and academics and people who should know better have responded to some of the signaling we're sending out. And that they're taking it all at face value without putting any sort of critical thinking or context behind it. And I think hyping it up and scaring people maybe more than they should be. And that's just a secondary or tertiary effect of what we're doing. And it's like, hey guys, like you might want to view this information with a little bit of skepticism. Like we're putting this out for them.
Right. Oh yeah.
You're not supposed to look at this and just take it at face value at the same way. But how do you mitigate that? And like you said, journalists have a responsibility to handle that in a responsible and credible way. And I think that maybe they could have done some more diligence on it and how they represented that information to the public.
Right. And so, and I hear you on that, and I agree with you. The other kind of the wild card, though, is I don't know if anybody knows what Vladimir Putin's going to do.
Sure.
From my limited time, working Russia, but from, extensive time on the Middle East, where there are plenty of other autocrats. I think that that these are individuals, leaders who are not, perhaps they act rationally sometimes, but they're not acting in the best interest of their country on courses of action that they want to take. And so, I would argue that kind of looking at the intelligence community overall, I think we've done the intelligence community has done a really good job of providing situational awareness to the policymakers. So there's 150,000 Russian troops, on the borders of Ukraine, and so. we have done our job. My old outfit has done its job of providing that warning function, but it's not our job to be predictive in time and place.
Right,
and you
right.
can't ask for that, especially with a leader who literally could change his mind, overnight based on a whim. So it's not like the intelligence community has to kind of get up and go home. But I think this has been they've had a pretty good run. Because you give the policymaker options, and what I like to do also is I like to think like kind of with the, what do we call it, the right of boom mentality. So that worst case option of full on invasion, we are now planning for that. So there are plans in place. To me, that's when the intelligence community has done its job.
I want to just dig a little bit deeper in there to kind of expand this for viewers, some people who are not follow this stuff super closely. As far as what we're trying to do by sending out some of this messaging, talking about the invasion being imminent, saying outright this invasion is going to happen, in some cases even putting like timelines on it. I recently interviewed Nick Trickett, who's a Russia analyst, and he had some very interesting things to say. His point was that by saying the Russians are going to invade, we're kind of taking that threat away from the Russian government. They can't threaten to invade because we're saying every day you're going to invade.
Right? No, look, I think it's pretty brilliant as well. Again, you're almost ahead of the decision cycle even of Putin. And so the warning of imminence also then allows allies to allows the United States to kind of rally our allies all together. I don't doubt that there is intelligence that shows that that Putin could invade at any time.
Right.
It's just a question of will he. And so maybe you push it a little bit and you say, or you kind of selectively leak saying that, the invasion is going to be on, I think it was actually supposed to be today, Wednesday. Well, there's no, I think that's,
and you're making him look like a punk because either he invades and proves that he's a bully,
right,
or he backs down, he blinks and looks like a coward.
I think we put him in a box, a bit. And so, and this doesn't work if we have, without diplomatic efforts amongst, the NATO alliance. It's really interesting because ultimately,
military efforts, we've deployed troops over to Romania,
and Poland,
and Germany.
And you actually have a strength in NATO to a degree that we couldn't even have imagined several years ago when former President Trump was dissing NATO all the time. Well, it's pretty amazing now that this move by Putin, this obviously an aggressive and threatening move has really allowed to kind of for the alliance to kind of regain its credibility, and ultimately I think that's a good thing, because again we're back in an era of great power competition. Or is that what we're calling it now? It was near peer.
Don't get me started on the buzzwords.
DoD always has a different buzzword, but we've moved away from kind of the CT wars, counterterrorism wars for 2 decades, and so we're back to great power competition where alliances really matter. And NATO is strengthened. That's a really good thing. Even the Germans are even coming around, and there's been a tremendous amount of criticism because Germany wouldn't allow for overflights and wouldn't provide any lethal assistance. But even I think even the Germans in private we're saying that Nord Stream 2, the gas pipeline, that would be canceled with the Russian invasion. So pretty remarkable. If you're into the transatlantic alliance stuff. This is, we're back at a high point.
And we're seeing, I was writing a week ago about how the focus on this is kind of going back to, mainstream DoD deterrence as opposed to the sexy counterterrorism special ops missions. And I think it's the DoD has the Office of International Cooperation or something of that nature. But it's just the programs that distribute lethal aid and includes trainers and training them up. And there's nothing secret about it. It's publicized quite openly. And all of that plays into deterrence, bringing Javelin missiles and other ammunition over there.
I think that it'll be interesting to kind of look back, and well, first of all, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, we could have this discussion now as we're saying, that, and
as tanks are rolling
across, and D, you got to check the Twitter feed. We'll redirect. Yeah, that's right. But so ultimately, that classic deterrence of providing, which is in essence defensive equipment, that might be, that might really have worked. At the end of the day, and so we're not back to sending thousands of U.S. forces. We are back to kind of that old classic style of providing military assistance to another country. Obviously, we provide training, but I think that's a good thing. And again, when we're talking about China, Russia, that's going to be the wave of the future.
What do you think, from your perspective, is President Putin's overarching goal with Ukraine?
So, I think this is where, so many in the United States and really many administrations have gotten it wrong because, Putin at the end of the day is obviously one not to be trusted, but he does not believe Ukraine is a country. He believes it's certainly part of kind of historic Russia, and his goal is to destroy the NATO alliance. I mean, and the amazing thing that people seem to miss is that he talks about this openly. He is open about this all the time. I mean, there's I think a famous session with the NATO Secretary General and Putin several years ago when the NATO Secretary General said something like, "We look forward to working with you," and Putin's response is, "Well, I look forward to destroying what you have built." I mean, NATO is not something that Russia ever would cooperate with or be in favor of, and so ultimately. I think we have to treat Putin for what he is. He is a autocrat in charge of a rogue state. Russia is not our friend. Myself and several other officers, maybe a year or two ago, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about kind of the fallacy of cooperation with Russia on counterterrorism, because we're always asked to do it, and we always kind of roll our eyes and off we go and do it, and it never works because they don't want to cooperate with us. And so ultimately, Russia has to be treated as an adversary and an enemy, and Putin's the head of that state, I guess, until 2030 something now. I mean, obviously there's some decree that was passed. So, this is something we're going to have to deal with for now, for decades into the future. But this is not our friend. And the other point too is that even as we kind of stand down, or perhaps the tensions diminish a bit in terms of Ukraine, he's still going to have 130,000 troops on the Ukrainian border, and I think this is going to be a long slog now. If there is no invasion, those units are not going back, to garrison. Those units will still be in a posture that's quite menacing, and so we're going to be kind of in this slow, long grind with Putin, and we got to stay strong on that.
I've tried to point out, I don't know what your thoughts are, that the Russian narrative or President Putin's narrative of stopping Ukraine from joining NATO is really moot in the sense of this current context, this current conflict.
Right.
They've already taken Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine.
Right.
There's no way that Ukraine can join NATO when they don't have control over some of their territory. It's the same reason why the Russians are in South Ossetia and Georgia. A country can't join the NATO alliance when it would immediately drag us all into an Article 5.
Absolutely.
So, what is Putin really talking about when he's talks about NATO, going into Ukraine?
Putin fears a democratic Ukraine. He fears a country on his border that is evolving, that does have democracy, that has freedom of thought and expression. I mean, that to me is kind of the basic part of it. The idea of NATO and NATO expansion is silly because it's not on the table. We can't openly say that Ukraine is not going to join NATO because Ukraine is a democratic country, and if it wants to join, it can go through a process of doing so, and we have to allow democratic states, to kind of move forward on that. But if it really was about Ukraine joining NATO, Putin wouldn't be there now because they're not going to join NATO.
Right.
Now, what's interesting is he has amassed enough force, and we are providing a considerable amount of defensive assistance. There was always the talk of the Finlandization.
Yes.
Well, Finland, has the F-35. So, is that what we, so are we going to end up, giving the F-35 to the Ukrainians? Well, they might not join NATO, but they might have the most advanced U.S. fighters at the end of the day. So, I think this is a huge kind of misstep by Putin. But the talk of NATO enlargement or not is not serious. That's certainly moot. And I think he really just fears democracy, a democratic state. And Ukraine is making progress, and that's a great thing for the United States, a great thing for the West. Certainly not a good thing for Putin.
Sorry, viewers out there, if you can hear the drilling going on next door. It's typical that you start doing one of these streams and somebody starts.
That's all right. We're during that. It's good to be in Brooklyn. I grew up in Jersey. I think Jack, I was telling you, I grew up in Jersey. As I was a kid, I think about my kids now and what I don't allow them to do. But when I was a kid at 11 years old, I'd jump on the train out of New Brunswick and come to see New York Ranger games at Madison Square Garden. And so it's, this is bringing me back to my childhood. I mean, New York it's different. I live down in Northern Virginia now, but New York is kind of tough and grimy, and I'm wearing my Doc Martens, so I got my New York look going. But this is a different place here. I think I've definitely parked illegally outside. I hope my truck doesn't get towed.
Wow. Yeah, it's so different. And as I frequently remind my my mom when I see her that, like, you remember when you used to leave me in the car while you'd go to the grocery grocery shopping?
With the windows rolled up?
Yeah, you get arrested for that these days. They throw you in the clink for that.
But it's and the other thing too is that even DC traffic's tough. But I drove from Queens to Brooklyn yesterday. It was a 10-mile drive. Took me 55 minutes.
Oh God,
the traffic here is killing me.
This is a subway city.
I know. But I drove.
Can't drive.
But
Dee's a driver.
It's good to be here. I think that the key thing was that I did have some good Italian food last night. And this morning, as I was kind of going back and forth on Twitter with you, I went off to get a good New York City bagel.
That's awesome.
So had to do it.
Are you working on any other book projects?
So what a great question. So I'm not sure. So I have something in mind, but really, when you write a book and this, like I got to give it more time to promote this one. So I'm going all around the country doing tons of speaking engagements.
Well,
I was just
it's also
in
going
Dallas.
to take you a year to write the book, and then it's going to take another year for it to get published.
Yeah.
So you got some time.
There's a side of me that it's not a memoir, so it's a book on leadership. So what's next? What else do I do? I don't want to really write about myself anymore. I think writing fiction is hard. I don't know if I'd be good at that. I've kind of made some friends who are authors, and I think that's a different bear.
It's a totally different skill.
But I'm really gonna stick with this and just kind of talking leadership. It's really a passion of mine, and we'll see what goes from there. The other part too, and I think you must remember this. I mean, the publishing industry is not easy. I think 1 in 100 books makes money, while my publisher HarperCollins was very good to me for a while, ultimately, the kind of the PR stuff, after several months that goes away, and you're kind of off on your own. So I really am doing this a lot on my own now. Obviously, trying to go out, and I still do kind of book events all over the country, and certainly leadership talks. But it's humbling. So I did a talk in Dallas 2 weeks ago. Actually, one in Dallas, one in Fort Worth. Fort Worth was packed. 100 people, sold a ton of books. It was amazing. But then, a couple weeks earlier, I did a Northern Virginia event, and I was there at a bookstore for an hour, and 2 people came, and that's humbling. I'm sitting there, and so you just never know. And so the kind of this whole book thing is you got to have a sense of humility.
Yeah.
It's you have some great events, and sometimes people don't show up, and that's okay, and you got to kind of pick yourself up and you say, okay, I know the book's good. I know I can do this, but I guess today just no one decided to show up.
My favorite was speaking, and I'm sure you must have these when you're speaking to your former colleagues and friends. But I did one event with the Special Forces Association and another at the Army Navy Club in D.C. And those are the audiences where like you're not going to get away with a bunch of bullshit war stories.
Right.
They're looking at you. Oh, really, Jack? Is that how that happened, huh?
Right. No, that's true. I mean, you definitely tailor it for your audience, and sometimes those audiences, that's where I you got to be on your game for that, because they'll call BS right away.
The questions are on point,
Yep.
But I like talking to those audiences and
sure, and the one of the things for me, which has been really rewarding, and again, you kind of never know, but I did a book event in Northern Virginia, and I had a couple former agency officers who worked for me in the past, and they came. And this was actually really cool. So my family was there. My son was kind of helping me out. Sometimes they come along, and one of these he's still in the agency now, and he's been a station chief multiple times. So he came to the event. And he took my son aside and he said, "Hey, I really like Marc Book. And by the way, he was the best leader I ever had, and he taught me so much. And he really taught me about all the things, all those principles about overcoming adversity. Like that really is what what got through to me, and that's what I practice now. And that to me kind of made it all kind of worthwhile, because this is he's someone who worked for me, but in a sense it's a peer. And if you can pass the torch to the next generation, like that to me is the most rewarding thing.
And did your son for so many years think you were just some dweeb diplomat?
Oh, totally, yeah, he always. Yeah. Although it's really funny, they at one point we caught a flight back home from the Middle East on the director's aircraft. So it's a C-17, but they slide in a VIP pod. And I think my kids were probably 10 or 11 years old, and then they're kind of scratching their heads like, this is not normal. Like, why are we flying back on this on this Air Force plane, and when there's all these security folks there, and then another time I think they really figured it out when It was Mike Morrell. He was acting director, and my wife was his executive assistant. My wife's a case officer too. She just retired, but she was his EA at the time. And I texted him. I said, "Hey, come over to watch a hockey game. Come over to watch a Caps game." So enrolled, two Suburbans full of the protective detail, lights flashing, and they pull into my driveway, and my son and my daughter are like, "What is going on? Like, this is not what State Department people do." And so when we finally told them, my wife and I, they were like, "We knew, no, whatever." But the stuff with kids is cool because you don't realize this, but it turns out they actually were really proud of what both my wife and I did, just in terms of public service and kind of defending the country, and so. They're super supportive of us. They're super defensive. Look, if you're in the public eye, some people don't like what I have to say, and they get, and my kids get pissed. And but I think they're really proud. I don't think they're going to do the same line of work. I think that they enjoyed kind of growing up and living in the Middle East, but I think they also kind of saw the toll, that it took on me, and so I think they might go a different route.
And sometimes we hear from viewers, and I get a lot of emails from people who are thinking about governmental service, and I'd always try to remind people too, like there's all sorts of different ways they serve their country.
Oh, absolutely.
You don't have to be a snake eater. You don't have to be a case officer. You don't have to. There's all sorts of different things. You can go and be into diplomacy. You can be an imagery analyst. I mean, there's all tons.
You can be a firefighter or a cop. You can do local stuff. I mean, I think. But what always motivated me was kind of doing something for the kind of the public good. I mean, I just look, I went to got my undergraduate and graduate degrees at Cornell. It's probably like some of your Columbia brothers and sisters. Like a lot of my friends from college have made a lot of money that I have not. Certainly not in my job and not selling a book.
That's why you need to go to Hollywood now.
That's right. But I mean, they made tons of money. But I was just never motivated by that.
Yeah.
And so
you can't get out of bed for it.
I really and I've had my kind of arguments with the agency, particularly, and maybe we'll talk about it later in terms of healthcare and some of the health stuff that I've gone through. But I really believe in the place, and I don't regret having done having served as an intelligence officer. And so, again, it was every day it was an exciting day. It's not like, I mean, it's overseas. You're kind of pretty pumped all the time. Serving at headquarters, it's not all that great battling traffic, but. Just a fascinating job. You're doing the right thing. I always would talk about, you open the front page of the Washington Post or the New York Times, and really all the stuff, the international events, are things that we contribute to, and sometimes you witness history, sometimes you make history. I mean, that's the stuff that I whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan or Syria or so many places. Where I would have to pinch myself sometimes that that we were involved in this, and that's what you want to do. And you can be on the tip of the spear in so many different ways. You can be in USAID or the State Department or Peace Corps or anything like that. But ultimately, it's the idea that you're kind of helping your country, and that motivated me so much. It sounds corny, but that's the way I tick. That's what makes me tick, at least.
Oh, it is. It's exciting. I wanted to hit you up too about all this stuff with what's come to be known as the Havana syndrome. You talked about it the first interview we did. Do you want to give the elevator pitch, I guess, or in brief, what happened to you in Moscow, so people who are just seeing this for the first time understand what happened? So
it was in December 2017. At the time, I was the deputy operations chief for what we call the Europe and Eurasia Mission Center. I had been a career officer in the Near East and counterterrorism. They moved a whole bunch of us over to do kind of Russia, frankly, in the pushback against Russia after the Russian election interference in 2016. And so I was put in a pretty senior position, and I needed to go to Moscow for what's simply called area familiarization. I went out there to see, obviously, the embassy. We had an ambassador there, John Huntsman, who was this kind of career, or not career, was a career, public servant in the sense he was governor of Utah, and he was ambassador in Beijing, and then ambassador in Moscow. And I was there to meet kind of my Russian counterparts, which is kind of strange, but is what we do. The CIA and KGB.
So this is above board. It's not covert.
Covert
it's like
at all.
A liaison.
It's a business trip.
Right.
It's a boring business trip. I was semi excited to go because I had never been to Russia. But it's not operational. There's no stress involved whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Staying at a nice hotel, and you're gonna have some meetings, and I'm just gonna go to Moscow and St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg is a beautiful city. And so I was excited to go. on the first couple nights of the trip. Well, let me just preface that the Russians didn't want me to go. It was interesting. So it was myself and another officer, and they started right before the trip. They started asking like, why are you coming here? Why, Mark? And now, of course, they knew me from the past, from the spy wars of all my time in the Middle East. But they started making some accusations, saying that is this why are you coming here? Is this trip operational? And our response was, that's insane. I'm a senior agency officer. I'm coming to meet you.
They thought you were coming to like pitch somebody or something.
That's so far fetched. I mean, it defies credulity. And but they ultimately allowed us to come. On the second or third night, I can't remember what it was, in December 2017, it was something awful happened. I woke up in the middle of the night with a stunning case of vertigo, terrible headache, tinnitus, which is ringing in my ears. Felt physically sick, but it was the vertigo, and it was pretty terrifying. Again, I'd spent a lot of time in Iraq, Afghanistan, other places, been shot at plenty of times. This was the scariest moment because I just had a total loss of control. And it started on this kind of awful health journey, which I have even till today, where I have a migraine. I've had a migraine for 4 years every day. I still have one now. I've just learned to live with it. Probably would feel better if I had a bourbon, but I got to drive back. Dee's getting some bottles out now. No, we're not going to do that. But ultimately, something terrible happened to me that night in Moscow. Now, when I came back and I kind of engaged in a bit of a back and forth, a bit of a battle with the CIA's medical staff, who didn't believe at first something happened to me. I didn't look like what had occurred to some officials from the U.S. Embassy in Havana in 2016.
When did you become aware that this wasn't a singular thing that had happened to you, that there were other people who were experiencing this?
So this is in December 2017. In 2016, the U.S. Embassy officials in Havana, Cuba, were subject to this, what's called Havana syndrome, and there are in far greater numbers, 20, 30 U.S. officials. So I was aware of that, but I wasn't thinking about it at all. But ultimately, when I came back and I started, trying to get medical care, and they said I didn't look like them, the symptoms they thought were a bit off. I think they've changed their mind on that now. But ultimately, I couldn't. So I started this path of trying to deal with the agency doctors. The agency medical staff, they kind of refused to put me in with the same group from Havana, which would have meant that I would have gone to certain facilities that were treating our officers, our U.S. officials, which was at the time the University of Pennsylvania, University of Miami, and University of Pennsylvania, where they were really providing care. And so I had to go off on my own, and I started this awful journey of seeing tens of doctors, everything from obviously neurologists, but infectious disease specialists, allergists, and went on and on. I had tons of different treatments, all sorts of steroid shots. I mean, it was this kind of a life of misery. And ultimately, it got to the point where I couldn't actually go to work. And so, starting when I came back, in 2018 onwards, I ended up retiring in July of 2019. But even in that really senior position, I could only go to work for 2 or 3 hours a day because of the headaches. And because of the brain fog. At one point, I was losing my cognitive, abilities. I couldn't drive. I lost my long distance vision. It came back after a while, but it truly was. I mean, it caused me to retire. And at the time, I was, I was in the senior intelligence service. I was, obviously, I had done quite well in my career, and I think there were certainly thoughts of me going even higher. At least my bosses.
You weren't ready to retire.
No, I had a lot more left in the tank. But I had to retire in July of 2019. Now, interestingly, as I was retiring, some of my other colleagues and friends, frankly, people I knew, started coming back from the field with the same symptoms.
What was their experience like? Were they getting hit in hotel rooms like you did?
Yes.
Really?
Very similar. And so that so that to me was, because you had what happened in 2016 in Havana. What happened to me in December of 2017 in Moscow, but by mid-2019, it started happening to others. And as I was walking out the door and retiring, I saw that some of my colleagues and friends were getting pretty severely affected by this. And make no mistake, this is not something that you bounce back from. There is an enormous recovery time. And in effect, when I got to when I finally got to Walter Reed's National Intrepid Center of Excellence, which is their traumatic brain injury program, I was diagnosed by Walter Reed with a TBI, based on what they called an external exposure event. So all of a sudden now, there's doctors. This is getting real. They believe us. and certainly things started changing, particularly in the medical community. That's something really did happen.
Guys, if you have questions for Mark, please get them in.
Isaac has a question, a long Patreon. It's on the Patreon if you have it set up.
Oh, okay. I'll get in there in a sec.
All right.
So, Mark, what has they have come to accept that this is happening to guys? How are they treating it? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but no one's really sure what the hell this is.
Right. So there's a couple things. So we now have multiple medical facilities in the United States that have treated U.S. officials. University of Miami, University of Pennsylvania, Johns Hopkins now is accepting our officers, as well as Walter Reed's traumatic brain injury program. And in essence, they're treating us as if we suffered and in my case, it was diagnosed a traumatic brain injury. And so what does that mean? Well, there's lots of different ways to treat this. There's kind of the pharmaceutical option. There's a for headaches. There's been a long history of using kind of classic antidepressants, frankly, to help for migraine headaches, and I have not had success from that. Others really have. There's physical therapy that you can do, and then there's things like obviously nutrition. Kind of classic wellness stuff. I mean, you want to see kind of funny things. It's not really funny, but it's a whole bunch of myself and a whole bunch of Navy SEALs or Air Force special operators like doing yoga every morning at Walter Reed. Like that stuff helps. Deep breathing techniques. There's sleep hygiene. 50% of TBI victims develop sleep apnea.
Yeah.
And I have it. And I did when I was tested there. So I go to the sleep lab at NICO and they take my blood pressure. It's 170 over 100. And they're like, holy shit. And then I do the sleep apnea test, and I'm off the charts. So I have what's called a CPAP. I look like a B-1 pilot when I sleep now. But that immediately has changed my life. Where now I know that my sleep hygiene is really good. So there's things you do. Obviously there's I see psychiatrists and psychologists, but there is a set kind of program for TBI victims. I think that has been really helpful for those of us who are kind of victims of you call it an anomalous health incident, Havana syndrome, whatever. But it's a slow process. I'm way better than I was a year ago, but I still got a headache right now. And so it's it takes a long time to recover. Now something happened. So there's an external exposure event to something. There's a theory on this that it was a directed energy. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a doctor. I think a lot of people, do believe that, but it's going to take some more kind of investigation.
Have you heard anything? Because since they started taking this a little more seriously in the last couple of years, the agency, from what I've read, they stood up sort of like a task force to look into this and to try to unpack and figure out what's going on. I mean, have you heard anything about why people are being targeted, who's behind it, what the technology is?
So I think there's we have to be again, and this is not a criticism of the media, but there's so many stories, and like I contribute to this by making comments about it, but so many stories on what's happening. So there's a couple of things. There's a panel of experts that the response to that would be keep looking. I mean they've been at it for 7 months. Right. It took us 10 years to find the most wanted man on the planet who's living in right outside Pakistan's version of West Point. So, it's okay. Like, we're 7 months into this. So we don't know who is doing this. They're not even sure what it is. They know people have effects that look like they've been subject to a directed energy attack. And we just got to kind of keep on going. And the only thing I would urge is patience. And because ultimately, I think it's been really interesting when myself and some others have gone and we've testified on Capitol Hill, both to the Senate and the House. And this is the right mechanism to do it. It's not to talk about this in great detail in the media. This is okay what we're doing now, but I'm talking about testifying in front of the House and the Senate Intelligence Committees in great detail. That's the right forum. It's a classified forum. But when senators and congressmen and congresswomen come out after seeing a victim, and I'm in pretty good shape, but they see some of the others who've been medically retired, who can't walk, some have gone legally blind. It's pretty compelling, and it's really hard to say, well, you were a tip of the spear case officer, from Havana, or from a European country, or from Moscow, or whatever, and now your life is essentially, been derailed. That you had you're kind of had a psychogenic attack, or this was mass hysteria. It's not. Something happened. We just got to get to the bottom of it. This is the U.S. government has been at best incompetent in responding to this. But you know what? Think about what happened after Agent Orange. After Gulf War syndrome, after burn pits. There's bad things happen sometimes. It takes us a long time to accept it, and the science has to come around, the investigation. But I kind of put it in those bins, and because people really have been injured by this. I mean, there's if you meet victims from this, you're not going to walk away thinking they made it all up.
It strikes me that this is a way to take chess pieces off the board,
Right.
and doing it without an assassination.
Yeah.
And there's
hybrid warfare.
No
Think
clear.
about that.
There's no murder weapon that we can identify.
Right.
We can't identify the weapon. We can't identify the actor behind it. But it's a way to take intelligence officers out of the field.
So I hate to use the word brilliant, but it is a brilliant technique, weapon, tactic, whatever this is. It's done several things. It's taken someone off the playing field. It's very hard to find attribution, and ultimately it's sowed incredible dissension. Even within the U.S. government. I mean, people still argue about whether this is real or not. There are elements within the agency who don't believe this. There are a whole bunch of elements within the agency that do believe it, and a lot of others, particularly in DoD. It's interesting to me that DoD has really kind of led the way in accepting that something bad has happened.
Oh, really?
I think that it was telling to me. I was at Walter Reed's, the TBI program. It's located in a certain building in Walter Reed, but I had to go across the street for some physical therapy. And I'll just, as an aside, if you ever want to be humbled, go to the PT clinic at Walter Reed, and whether you see double amputees. I mean, I was in tears every time I went over there. But I sat down with one of the specialists, and I said, hey, I'm from across the street over at NICO at the TBI clinic. I'm one of the folks who had kind of and it's even hard to talk about. I said, been a victim of Havana syndrome. And she said to me, she goes, "Oh, I've seen a whole bunch of you folks." And I said, "Well, that's not possible. I'm the only second person who's been here." And she said, "No, you're not. There's a whole bunch of DoD folks who've been here for this in the past."
Shit.
Right.
Wow.
And that's what I said. And then she saw the look on my face, and I said, "Hey, can you tell me more about that?" And then she said, "I can't because of patient privilege." But
Holy
clearly,
fuck.
DoD has had experience with this in the past. And one of the interesting things is I
wonder if it's our intel guys or our JSOC guys or who's being. It would be interesting to find out who's being targeted.
Well, here's and there's a lot of stuff in open source research, but it was about maybe a year or so ago. And bids for contracts are always put out in public. Well, JSOC put out a bid for a body-worn device that would detect directed energy. So if JSOC is actually wants operators to wear this, that means it's serious.
Something's happening.
Yep. And so there's no doubt in my mind that DoD has had experience in this. And so again, it's one of the things that we haven't had is a whole of government approach. You saw recently that the CIA put out an interim report, which caused all sorts of controversy,
Yeah.
and then later on, the DNI put out a report from the experts panel that seemed to contradict this. Well, all this is kind of messy, and you're watching the sausage being made, which is
Right.
not pleasant. What you need is a whole of government approach. We need a coordinator, and I think we have one now. After this kind of mess. But a coordinator at the National Security Council who's actually going to put all the agencies together. And so you're going to marry up what DoD is doing with what state is doing with what CIA is doing. But to me, the answer to this lies in DoD. There's no doubt because they also have expertise in kind of unconventional weapons
Right.
programs.
And if we're to follow this kind of thesis through, I'm kind of curious, like, why would the Russians buzz like the entire U.S. embassy in Havana? Do you think that's just because they were pissed off that we're normalizing relations?
100%. I mean, that to me makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it caused us to evacuate to close the embassy in essence. And so that to me, is
You think that shows a sort of political intelligence behind what's being done?
Yeah, I guess that's a solid explanation there. Now, why are there attacks at other places around the world? I don't know. And the other thing too that would concern me is, what is their target selection if it is an adversary doing this, and why? Now, the agency came out in the interim report and said something to the extent of, they don't see any kind of patterns. Yet a whole bunch of my friends who all involved in Russian operations did get hit. And so, to me, that is pretty significant. And so, look, the other thing is, directed energy weapons is nothing new. The Russians have had a long, extensive program. They have published papers in the open source on this. Sometimes myself and some others tweet this out every once in a while just to remind the public and the intelligence community that the Russians have a program. Now, we're not saying they did this. I think they did, but that's just me, based on I'm not in government anymore. But countries have these directed energy weapons programs, and so I think that I would imagine there's going to be a lot of focus on that going forward, whether it's Russia or China or Iran or other states that do have, and we have it as well. We have them.
What do you make of the reports of people getting zapped, like right in Washington D.C., like walking around to the Lincoln Memorial and?
So I have to be really careful on this, because the one thing that happened with me is that people when I kind of came out, and because I was in essence begging for health care, that people kind of dismissed me. So I don't want to be dismissive of others. And so, my kind of response on that is, I've talked to some of these officials, from the National Security Council and others who've been hit. The symptoms they have are very similar, and that's and they are hurting. They have taken enormous career hits, and they're getting medical attention. So I think you just have to, show some empathy. There is, it's hard to imagine that adversaries are running around the United States in great numbers doing this, but it's also we also had a history of Russian intelligence operations on U.S. soil as well. So you just don't know. I don't like dismissing folks' claims.
Yeah, neither would I. I mean, I want to follow wherever the evidence leads us on that. But I mean, you'd think has this technology really been miniaturized to the point that you can do something like that? Like
right.
there isn't like a huge panel van nearby.
Right. I mean, I hear you. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes as I'm talking on this stuff, because there's no doubt in my mind that something happened to me in Moscow. So I'm very confident of saying that. I emerged a different person and had to retire. Was it a directed energy attack? Was it poison? But I don't know. But something happened that changed the course of my life. So I'm really confident on that. But then sometimes when we start talking about these attacks on kind of a bigger scale or in the United States, and I want to show empathy, for the victims, then I feel like I'm one of the folks like chasing UFOs. Like, it starts sounding like a crazy person, and that's I don't want to be that. I don't want to kind of charge that there's this kind of mass campaign that's affected thousands of people. But as the experts panel from the DNI said, there are several dozen cases that are unexplained. That it is entirely plausible to them, and likely that it was a directed energy attack on our officers. And so I just have to kind of go with that.
Yeah, I don't want to paint anyone as being quote unquote crazy, right? There is, I think, going to be a point where this starts to overlap with the conspiracy theorist, which is what the danger is.
Yep.
Like, are you familiar with gang stalking?
No.
These people have been around since like the 70s or 80s. But there are people, I think most of them have some form of schizophrenia, and they believe that they call themselves TIs, targeted indiviants.
Oh, that's right.
And they believe the NSA is following them around.
No, they hit me up on Twitter.
And blasting them with directed energy. They inbox me too, because they think I know something about it.
Right.
And it's the New York Times actually did a very interesting story on them maybe like 5 years ago, talking about, because of the internet, all of these people have been able to meet each other and form sort of group self-help kind of things where they all come together, and now it becomes a sort of mutually assuring delusion because they're all convincing one another that this is happening.
No, I get letters to my house. I get phone calls on my home phone. I do know, and that's the danger of this. I certainly get it. I don't even like the role of I love talking about my book, talking about foreign affairs, because we talk about this. I end up kind of playing the role of professional victim. Not what I want to be remembered for.
Sure.
And so, and with that said, so I sympathize with the intelligence community for the following reason. So, they didn't take this seriously for a long time. Then we had this kind of a spate of attacks, which I think these are the core ones that are still unexplained. Then what the U.S. government did, in good intentions, but what was inevitably the wrong move, was basically announce to our overseas personnel, if you are not feeling well, if you have a headache, write in and tell us. So if you read the press reports, and if they're accurate, then there were 1,000 cases of this worldwide. Well, that's a self-inflicted wound. So what we have now done is we've solved most of those, 99% of those cases, which was generated by our data call, in essence, and we're back to this core group of several dozen that are unexplained. and so I sympathize a bit because they had to kind of cull through the data. But now we're back to kind of square one. So, what I kind of, the way I leave this now is, in the last 8 months, we actually haven't gotten anywhere. Now they say that they can't find attribution. Okay. But ultimately we're still down to, several dozen cases. By the way, if you're talking 30 cases, that's extraordinary. Where people are injured, are being treated in U.S. medical facilities, and where doctors say they were subject to something. That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And so, the whole thing has been kind of messy to deal with. It's fought in the media all the time. The headlines are always coming out. It seems like there's whiplash sometimes that this is all made up. No, this is real. And ultimately, I would just urge patience. We'll get to the bottom of this. The U.S. government as a whole, not the CIA, but the U.S. government, which means DOD, it means the CIA, it means DOD, the intelligence community, it means our national labs, it means academics and researchers, it means open source entities as well. I mean, look what Bellingcat has done, over the years to uncover kind of Russian malfeasance all over the world. And so, there's going to be data out there that has to be collected, and at some point we'll get to the bottom of this.
We definitely haven't heard the last word on it.
Yeah.
Let me hit up a few questions here. Isaac asks, Mark, I'm almost 29. I just started university. I'm majoring in information systems, and I want to get a master's in cybersecurity. I want to one day join an agency, but I feel like the older I get, the more my chances demur. I want to be like Batman and Snake, but I wasn't able to join the military, so I hope whenever I get my master's, people will look past my flaws, but want to do what can I do to increase my chances, because I want to do cyber and paramilitary, but I'm afraid I'll never get to live my dream. So what should I do to increase my chances, I guess, of joining the agency?
No, it's a great question. I get asked all the time. One of the things I really have fun doing is I go and I talk to colleges. And it's not just my leadership talk. I'll go talk to them about the intelligence community, because one of the things I found most rewarding was kind of, again, passing the torch to the next generation. So college kids ask me all the time, what should I do to better my chances? What should I study? What's my degree? And my response is pretty basic. One is, it doesn't matter. Study whatever you want to study. Now, if you want to get into cybersecurity, go get that degree, your undergraduate, your master's, computer science. That's great. But you need, but to be, to go into the intelligence community, and really I'm talking about the operational side. I'm not talking about the analytics side. You get a leg up if you learn a foreign language and a hard target language, and that means, it's Russian, Chinese, Farsi, Arabic, Korean. Learn one of those 5 languages, and you can have a degree in nothing, and you will get put to the top of the pile. Period. That's what we need. And then you have to have just that kind of intangible, which is, this curiosity for the world. And I tell people all the time, I said, if you want to live in America, you're going to join the FBI. If you like foreign cultures and people and food and religion and have this curiosity, being a CIA officer is a really neat thing. But guess what? You're not hanging out with Americans. Like I don't want you comfortable on a U.S. military base or at an embassy. You got to be hanging on the street with the with the shabab, the kind of with kind of folks in the Middle East. You got to be comfortable taking taxis and just kind of immersing yourself in different cultures and having that curiosity. And so my response would be study whatever you want, but that kind of learning a foreign language is absolutely critical.
The agency is also, correct me if I'm wrong, like increasingly interested in recruiting people who don't look like me and you.
That's right. Yep. And I
don't mean in a negative set.
No,
I mean for very practical reasons.
No, so this is going to be a fun conversation about the wokeness of the agency. And this drives me nuts because the agency put out this video which everyone went crazy over. That it was they thought it was too woke, and it annoys me because of the following: diversity is an operational advantage in operations as a case officer, because again, so if I'm sitting in the Middle East somewhere, I don't want someone like me or you. I want someone who's not going to get caught, because your job is to meet an agent clandestinely. So if you don't look like an American, it's a hell of a lot easier. I loved in every station that I ever was managing, and had oversight over operations, particularly in the Middle East, to use female operations officers. And I tell a great story in the book of we had a female officer out on a surveillance detection route, and by chance, she was spotted, and we later on through a penetration, we got a report saying that, hey, the host service saw X, Y, and Z, this female officer, and what they believe was a surveillance detection run. And because of that, let's put surveillance on her husband because she could never be a spy because she's a girl. And so that's how we win. I remember years and years ago in one of the stations in the Middle East, we had a case officer who was Filipino national. It's a Filipino American. He was invisible. So Filipinos in the Middle East are not treated well.
Yeah, because they're like
the domestic servants and stuff like that. This guy could go anywhere at any time
with a mop in his hand, and no
that's
one would
how,
look twice.
Because so diversity is our operational advantage. It's how we win. It's not being woke. It's how we actually
that commercial they did was a little over the top.
It's totally over, but what I don't like is then you have kind of the old guard like saying like, oh my God, this is the end of civilization.
Yeah, that's also a little over the top.
It's over the top. But again, I loved having diversity in our officer corps because again, as you tailor operations, you do it for one thing. You do it so you don't get caught. That's how we win. And what's interesting is as in the intelligence business, particularly if you're kind of serving in a denied area, like that's the only thing you got. So the host country is going to kind of treat you like shit all the time. They're gonna break into your house. They're gonna take a dump or take a piss in your toilet. They're gonna leave it. Or they're gonna take a dump in the middle of your living room. They turn your stereo up super loud. I mean, I remember in one posting I came in, middle of winter, all of our windows were open everywhere. Stuff's trashed. So as we're subject to that, if we know in the back of our minds, hey, you know what, we're kicking their ass clandestinely all the time. That's a tremendous feeling, and you do that from having a diverse workforce. Kind of simple as that.
And the conventional thinking I think a lot of people have is like, you can't send a woman to the Middle East. It's a male-dominated culture.
Right. Well, guess what? First of all, that's not true. There's two things on that. One, again, is kind of operationally going out in the street. But number two, well, I'm not going to get in trouble on this, but it's what I believed is some of the best handlers of our Arab agents were female officers. Now, why is that? And let me preface this that my wife is Lebanese. She's and so I married an Arab, so I can say these things sometimes. But there's a really interesting dynamic in the Arab world between a female, a mom, a mother, and their son. And so if you can and the respect that an Arab male has for the mother figure is extraordinary. If you can replicate that in running operations, you have a female officer who has an incredible amount of control over an Arab, a male agent.
Sometimes are the Arab men more willing to divulge to a woman for that
that's
reason?
Right, yeah. And so these are kind of the things that I would think about as we're kind of trying to tailoring operations, or we have a pool of agents, or I have to figure out who's going to handle this source. Maybe the most difficult agent should be handled by someone if you can replicate that dynamic, that mother-son dynamic. And so again, it's for our operational advantage. That's it. That's how we win.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I love that kind of stuff too. And there's nothing better than watching, someone who doesn't look like an American but who is a great patriot just kicking the shit out of another service just because based on their prejudices. And that happened all the time.
That was very much the case when we interviewed. Where's her book? I have it over here somewhere. But Marty Peterson, when I interviewed her,
right.
And this was like 1975 in Moscow. Yeah,
that's right.
And they were like, no fucking way is a woman a CIA case officer.
Right. Yep.
And she was invisible to them.
So bring it. You love that. And you can replicate that across the board, because again, a lot of these third world countries have, just kind of deeply ingrained prejudices. If it's male dominated or whatever, if race, religion, it just doesn't matter. But if we can put people out in the street who don't get caught, who can handle folks, in a particular way, that's how we win.
Mitch asks, this is an interesting question. Is there any data on hand from Canada or other Western countries that is helping to form a better picture of the Havana syndrome, whether circumstantially or otherwise?
Well, Canadians, sure, because the Canadians were subject to this. They're Canadian diplomats in Havana.
Okay,
yeah, they have, and there's certainly a lot of it's similar in the sense of the Canadian officials who were hit by this have kind of equally been frustrated by their governments. Response and kind of lack of empathy and lack of medical care. One of the really interesting things though is, and it's it's something that that obviously those who are investigating this have to digest and really kind of wonder is why is it just in some sense a couple Canadians, but why just American officials? I mean, this hasn't happened to the Brits, or, our closest ally, or the French or others, and I can't answer that. It's just something that, but that is certainly notable.
Jackson asks, what is the worst intelligence-based movie of all time? Is there anyone that really comes to mind?
Oh, the worst one. Wow. I mean, there's all of them is the answer, but no. I mean, Homeland was kind of silly. Not real. But in terms of, but a lot of these are fun. I mean, James Bond movies are super fun, but it has nothing to do with anything.
Right. Wasn't there the Al Pacino movie, The Recruit? The Recruit.
That's right. The Recruit.
That was a pretty bad one.
Yep. No, that was not good. But I like to flip the question a little bit. There's some sleeper movies that I love. So one is Ronin.
Yes, I love that movie.
Which with Robert De Niro, and it's still like debated on Twitter. Was he actually a CIA knock or a former knock? And the last scene, is that his handler from inside Paris Station? But there's tradecraft in there that those of us who are practitioners of the arts kind of love. Whether it's brush passes or certain combo protocols. So Ronin was incredible to me. Also interesting because they're penetrating kind of European terrorist networks. That doesn't get a lot of play anymore. Everything is kind of Middle East terrorism.
No, that is a great
movie. And then
what about Spy Game with Redford and Brad Pitt?
Yep. So I like that because and the parts of it I like the scenes from Beirut, and I like the scenes of East Germany. When they're doing some, again, tradecraft stuff and kind of getting car tosses and people getting dumped out of the trunk of a car. I mean, so that to me was interesting. It also is the funny part about that we all laughed about is Robert Redford retires with at the end of his CIA career with $200,000 in the bank. That ain't a lot. That's but it's also kind of again maybe a reflection of government service doesn't pay that well.
What about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy?
That was good, yeah, and the various incarnations of it. There was the series that BBC did a couple years ago, which was awesome. I like that. That's Le Carré is always kind of brilliant in his analysis. Although towards the end of his career, I think he had this kind of hatred of America. It was very critical of the Iraq War and other things. But speaking of John Le Carré, it's one of my favorite espionage books of all time, and my favorite espionage movie, which is The Little Drummer Girl.
I haven't read it.
So and that's about the Mossad running an operation against the Palestinian terrorist groups. It is extraordinary, and because it is really interesting because it deals with kind of the personal nature of agent handling. Something I talk about in my book all the time, because one of the things that I found most interesting was that kind of personal dynamic between the case officer and the agent. And so The Little Drummer Girl has that in spades, and it is amazing. And the movie was fantastic.
I just got this book in the mail. It's an older book that I ordered on. Someone recommended it to me. This was published, let me see here, what year? 1982.
Oh, wow.
So this is The Setup, by Vladimir Volkov. A novel of disinformation.
Interesting.
So this was just someone recommended it to me. I have not. I don't know really much about it at all.
Right.
Born in Paris to Russian parents, fought with the French army in the Algerian War. Came to the States in '66. Taught French and Russian at college. Written textbooks, plays, novels. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's about Russian disinformation. So I don't know. I'll give it a try.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how much of bullshit is Zero Dark?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that question. That gets so much so let me just say, I didn't mind it. I liked the movie. I also, for those of us, so if you ask a CIA officer what they think about this, some people are going to say it was good. Some people are going to say it was BS. But I think the real answer is it was an amalgamation of so many different stories. So there's parts of that I know actually are pretty good. But there's other parts of it
which they combine the Chapman bombing and Bin Laden. These are not.
Right, but there's elements of kind of different parts of the story that ring true to me and my friends who were actually involved say is pretty good. The biggest controversy of that, well, there's two things. One is that the agency cooperated.
Yeah.
And so the second that happens, everybody said kind of questions that. But the other part was just the idea that enhanced interrogation techniques were useful. And I think that's what a lot of critics see that movie as kind of pushing that notion. And if you ask me about that, I still think that's kind of an unknown. So I'm not as upset about the movie. It's part of kind of cinema, of Hollywood. It shouldn't be treated
fact.
as fact.
Yeah.
It's probably a little more kind of, what do you call it? Historical, fiction. It's a good movie. I mean, you watch it and afterwards, I mean, there's
Just
parts
as a
of it
film.
as a film,
Yeah.
but it's not a documentary. But people get really passionate about that. And there's still friends of mine who work counterterrorism and just it just hasn't even, interestingly enough, they haven't even seen it. For me, I did see it. And I've seen it a couple times. The reason why I like watching it is there are a couple individuals that have to obviously remain unnamed who are totally based on some of my friends, and that to me is always amusing. Yeah. So.
Jackson asks, are there ever civilians who end up becoming ground branch PMOOs, or is that a total myth perpetuated by SOF and intel-driven novels?
So I was not a member of Special Activities Center, or I was not a paramilitary operations officer. I came from kind of conventional side from the Near East Division. To become a PMOO, and I might get this kind of wrong, but I think 99.9% all come from their former military, and generally from the Special Operations Forces. A lot of them from the U.S. Marine Corps. But you need to have military experience, and you should to kind of go that route. And so it's prior military experience, and I believe a college degree is a prerequisite.
It's pretty cool. Tyler, thank you. And Joe, Joe asks, how accurate is the polygraph?
Not accurate at all.
Yeah.
The polygraph is a tool, and so the polygraph is something that to me, and to a lot of us, it was a hated part of kind of your security processing. Because just based on science and research and in fact that it's not necessarily accurate.
It's pseudoscience.
It's pseudoscience, and so it is designed to keep me and you and everybody else who is in a position where a polygraph is required, designed to keep you on the up and up. So guess what? Like CI officers, aren't smoking weed. It's not because we don't want to smoke weed. It's because you're going to get jammed up on the polygraph. So ultimately, it's and CI officers, when they're in, don't talk to the press. Well, why is that? Well, it's because when you get polygraphed, you're worried that that's gonna come out. So it is a useful tool to kind of coerce behavior that they want. Now,
polygraph is fake news. Inbox me, guys.
There you go.
I'm here.
But here's the critical part of what's interesting in terms of the polygraph. So polygraph is used to kind of vet our officers. As a security tool. It's also used when we're running an agent. So sometimes, and so that is another tool. It's interesting. So we know it's not reliable, but if you are polygraphing your agent, that's gonna help ensure, not always, that they're actually providing
it works
accurate
because people
information.
believe it works, and it shakes them up, and they start divulging stuff.
Well, so for example, so if we have an agent and we're paying them a lot of money, and they have access to something. Let's say their access goes away. Well, then the gravy train's about to get turned off. That's a life cycle of an operation. Well, oftentimes that agent will then start embellishing things, making up access.
I got you, yeah.
And so, in order to kind of mitigate that, if we're polygraphing someone, regularly or routinely, they're going to be much less, prone to kind of, going down that road of embellishing, knowing that they're going to have some kind of security interview that they're going to get tripped up. So it just like for a CIA officer or agents overseas, it's a tool. But there's been plenty of research, and I think even U.S. courts, U.S. law, it's not admissible. So there is certainly an issue on the accuracy of that. And it's not a really particularly pleasant process.
Isaac says, I saw Berlin Station and looked it up if it was accurate, and I learned the CIA was spying in Germany. Agents were caught in 2009 and 10. Were you involved?
No, I was not involved in that. But at the end of the day, it's a business that is run by humans. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes our agents make mistakes, and sometimes you get caught. That's very well publicized incidents that happened in Germany. I think it led to kind of the expulsion of some U.S. officials. But make no mistake, we have the notion that we don't spy on some of our friends is something that I think is makes everyone feel better. But do we have interests, or do we have friends, or do we just have interests? Mm-hmm. Look, and a perfect example is kind of one of our best quote friends in the entire planet as a nation is the country of Israel. Israel spies on us, maniacally.
Yeah.
And they've gotten caught, but they do so, and we know they do, and still a great ally. But espionage is what's the oldest profession?
Prostitution.
Right. Espionage is the second oldest profession. So it's no accident that sometimes friends get caught kind of doing things maybe that make people feel uncomfortable.
David, thank you. Michael, please ask Mark to elaborate as far as Russia not cooperating with us when they asked for our help with counterterrorism, which is, after 9/11, there was a real concerted effort, a genuine effort, right, to work with the Russians.
Sort of. There was an agreement that the Russians allowed us to operate bases in their former Soviet republics, whether we're talking about the stands. But in actual counterterrorism cooperation, it's always been a one-way street. So we've given the Russians stuff, and they've given us very little in return, because ultimately they don't have an interest in doing so. And so I think the heyday of the cooperative effort was that we had bases in the famous bases in Uzbekistan and others. And other locations, but that was just Russia agreeing to allow us to do that in their kind of sphere of influence. The idea that they have given us information that thwarted terrorist attacks, certainly not anything I ever saw.
KT wants to hear from you. What do you think is the best book on CIA history that people should read?
Oh wow, I have to get back to you on that. There's been a couple kind of grand treatises that have been written. Often they're very negative on certain areas. So I'm loath to kind of recommend, but they're interesting. I'll get back to you on that. I think that one of the really interesting things is that there's not a ton, and I wish there was more kind of university classes or seminars on intelligence where it would be a semester long, and some schools certainly have that.
I took one at Columbia of all places. I think it was intelligence studies or something like that.
And that's really good, and that's where you kind of get. So it's not going to be a foreign policy class with a lecture or two on intelligence. But yeah, I'll have to think if there's a single book that kind of encapsulates everything, because a lot of them are very negative. And look, there's controversial things the agency has done in the past. One of the I'm Greek. I was born in Greece. My dad's Greek, and my dad hated the CIA because he remembered the CIA support for the colonels for the junta in the 1970s. Now it's 2022 right now, and my dad's 83 years old, and we're still having this argument about what happened a hell of a long time ago.
Greek's going to make a comeback from Cyprus. Don't worry. Don't worry.
There's a funny story I always tell on that, because people really have long memories. This happened in the 1970s,
Yeah.
But when I came back from Iraq, I was very fortunate to receive the distinguished it's called the Distinguished Intelligence Medal, which is the agency's second highest award for some of the stuff I did in Iraq. And George Tenet was the CIA director at the time, and my dad was invited to the bubble, at CIA headquarters for the ceremony, and I knew Tenet because because the Greek mafia really runs the CIA. That's something your listeners didn't know, but now they kind of get a hint at it. But beforehand, I went to my dad agreed to come, even though he always grumbled about kind of my career choice, and I went to Tenet beforehand. And I said, would you mind just talking to my dad, because he hates this place. And he hates what I do. And he's laughing because he knows. And so my dad comes to the ceremony, and Tenet takes him aside, and they speak Greek together, in Greek for 15 minutes. And my dad comes back. It's a really neat story. My dad comes back, he has tears in his eyes. And I said, what did the director say? And he said nothing. But he wouldn't talk. And so I saw Tenet later on. And I said, what'd you tell my dad? And this is out of he's trying to do the right thing. He said, I told your dad you were a hero. And it was, because I wanted, he goes, I know that you have this kind of, dispute with him about the agency, and I thanked Tenet, tremendously for that. It was really a nice thing he did for me and my family. And of course, later on, when I was talking to my dad, and I said, I talked to George, and he told me what he said, and my father said, he goes, this is a long time ago when Tenet was director. He says, I'm fine with you being in the CIA as long as George Tenet's the director, because it's a Greek. I said, okay. So then Tenet left, and now my dad's back to questioning my career choice. But a really neat move by Tenet to do that for me. That
Yeah.
was a really personal thing. I mean, that's a leadership thing too. It's like took him 15 minutes out of his day.
Talk to a family
Yeah.
member, and I certainly don't think the agency is like above critique by any means. And I know there's folks out there that have mixed opinions about some of the stuff that I've written about the agency, but at the same time, a lot of the criticisms you often hear over and over again, people are like reaching back to like pre-Church Committee,
Right.
MK
Yeah.
Ultra. Like the CIA is not the same that it was in 1958. It's a lot
so-
of time has passed.
Jack, you're totally right. And the critical thing that I've said all along in my career when I talk about the agency is that we actually, and this, I was an operations officer, and we actually believe strongly in congressional oversight. And for a long time, the CIA hated congressional
But
oversight.
the public still thinks you guys are like smoking people without any.
Right. But here's what happened. Here's why congressional oversight is good. Is number one, to keep us honest. Because the CIA does not belong to the CIA. The CIA is it's an executive branch tool where CIA doesn't do stuff. It's the United States does through obviously through the executive branch. It's U.S. government actions, not just the agency. But number two, when we're asked to do unusual things, it's all legal. It's all legal. The Department of Justice is involved, and it's a brief to the congressional committees. And one of the things that you see time and again when some kind of scandal kind of comes forward or there's something controversial. Perfect example is the EITs, the enhanced interrogation techniques. This was briefed to everybody multiple times. Now maybe it was the wrong thing to do. Maybe history is not going to judge us fairly or judge that it was wrong. But it was not the CIA going off rogue on its own.
Right.
Members of the House and Senate leadership knew exactly what we were doing and
then
approved
after
of it.
it comes out, "Look, we never heard of this.
And that's
This is
bullshit.
outrageous.
That's not to say it was right, but but ultimately it's kind of because we you're smart when you're asked to do some unusual things. I was involved, I think, in every covert action program in the Middle East for 2 decades. And this is covert action. These are findings. Some of these are lethal findings. But ultimately, we spend so much time with Congress that that, and sometimes things go wrong, on these programs. But at least there has been oversight. You had permission. There's no kind of rogue operations. And so, when people talk about the CIA going rogue, because insiders, like people, you kind of laugh, like you can't go to the bathroom without telling Congress, and that's good. You want that. But very rarely do we ever kind of do stuff that is a surprise to anybody on the Hill.
So, like in the lead up to the Iraq War, when the intelligence to most CIA folks was, not coming out exactly, it wasn't what we were being fed. And I'm sure the CIA knew that more than anybody. When there was a concerted effort to like cherry pick intel, like what were you guys feeling in the CIA at the time?
Oh no, I see what you're saying. So let me just, I'll give you just a vignette. So we're up in northern Iraq. I know you've had some, Sam and others here, who led those teams, and I was on I was with Mick Mulroy, my old friend, on kind of a different team up in northern Iraq. I'll never forget watching Colin Powell's speech when he's kind of laying the case for the war and talking about Iraq WMD, and we're all looking and saying like,
What?
never saw like great, was a different stream that we haven't seen, but good on us that we have that. And so there's always kind of skepticism, but ultimately that was a tremendous failure of the agency. More so on analysis rather than collection, but ultimately, I think as you kind of reflect on that, that was just a tremendous analytic failure, and things are now put in place, but it's not like we knew that we were misleading.
There was a lot of like
States.
malfeasance from the White House side too. Because weren't they coming
that's
down?
the second point, right?
They were coming down and
Yeah.
cherry picking what they wanted,
Absolutely.
and by going around the analysts.
So there was a absolute concerted effort by both White House and DoD, some officials in DoD to cherry pick intel. So there are kind of famous incidents of was there cooperation between Al Qaeda and the Iraqis, and so that was always kind of out there. And there are all sorts of allegations on this. Well, what does that really mean? And I can't go into details of it, but if there was, let's say there was a meeting once, that can be conflated into something that it's not.
Right.
And so I think that that ultimately that there's been so many kind of safeguards put in place with ombudsman at the CIA and other things where we're not going to hopefully have that happen again. But there was never a moment where we thought that wow, the CIA and we're misleading the American people and the office of the presidents.
What did you think
this.
about this stuff that has hit the news in the last week about Durham's report that the CIA was like unilaterally spying on Trump?
Look, I find it, this has caused this kind of hysteria in right-wing media. I've read a little bit about this, and what I seem to have gleaned is that there was an attempt made to ensure that that the White House was not being hacked during the Obama administration, and they have conflated that into somehow that the Hillary campaign was spying on Trump. I mean, I think it's I think that if you as you kind of read exactly what Durham is saying, it is far less sensational. And so I mean I don't know, this it goes down the kind of the political rabbit hole. I mean but the idea that that there was some people spying on the Trump White House.
People are reading something into it that's not there.
And and again, I'm not an expert on this, but there are legitimate entities that look at certain agencies to make sure they're not being hacked, and I think that's what was being done. And that doesn't mean that you can actually even see content of this. And again, my understanding this was done, it was done during the Obama administration. So, it's going to be, people are going to run with this, and I just, it's exhausting to me. It actually, if you read the what Durham put out, it is wildly confusing.
It is not what the headlines are saying.
It's not, but it's massively confusing. No one understands it, and then the narrative is that the Hillary campaign spied on Trump, and then you have. And frankly, I told you I wasn't going to get into politics. But then you have, former President Trump calling for the execution of some of these officials. I mean, this is getting totally crazy.
I'll go back to an easier topic, like Iraq in 2003. Like when the Valerie Plame stuff was going down, what was morale like in the CIA?
So that's interesting because that was when Valerie Plame was kind of outed as a CIA officer. What I kind of respond to on stuff like this is people at the agency actually, when they're actually unlike me who's retired and talking about this stuff, people just have a lot of kind of shit to do during the day, and so they just do their jobs. And so ultimately, I don't think it has a particularly bad effect on morale. I mean, sometimes we get caught up in politics, but the bottom line is that even during the Trump administration, where former President Trump was attacking the agency regularly, attacking the intelligence community, people there just did their jobs. The great part about being at CI headquarters is you don't have access to Twitter. I mean, obviously, there's our operations center is probably monitoring something in Twitter, but no, so meanwhile, you and I are sitting around, and the three of us are like, oh my God,
you're not getting news alerts on your phone.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so so ultimately, we just do our job, and kind of I think it's not helpful if there's kind of political controversy, but ultimately, I mean, you're busy as hell every day, and so whether you're an operations officer, an analyst. It doesn't have all that much of an effect, which is I think a really good thing. And I always kind of joke with people, like, I had no idea the political affiliation of anybody I worked with. I will tell you that to a person, all we want from a president and Congress is to just say yes on operations, just to give us permission to do stuff we want to do. But I served under 4 presidents, and they were all different, and there was always controversy. And clearly, under the Trump administration, it was there was so much churn and all the attacks in the intelligence community. But then you got to remember, during the Obama administration, the NSC had 400 people in it. So to get things done, the kind of approval process was really onerous. And so we were, I always talk about we're cranky under any president, any administration. It's kind of universal, and I'm sure the same thing is happening now.
I wanted to make sure that we talk about this. Project that you're working on with William.
Yes.
That it's very clever and an intelligent way to kind of reach out to people as far as like fighting PTSD and especially suicide in amongst service members.
So this has become a really great passion of mine. It's a company called Sound Off, and I'm on the board, and I'm just I have to say totally unpaid, which is the right thing. But Sound Off was created by a fellow by the name of William Negley, who was a former CIA officer, and his brother-in-law was someone by the name of Bill Mulder, who was a SEAL Team 6 operator who, 100+ days after separating from the Navy after retiring, killed himself. And Sound Off is a company, but in essence, it is an app that you put on your cell phone, where it allows for anonymous mental health services. So you are connected to a someone, a clinician, or what we can call a battle buddy, but someone who's going to provide anonymous healthcare. And why is that anonymous mental health care? Why is that important? Because of the stigma that exists. And Jack, you know this. Amongst whether it's the special operations community, regular military, or the intelligence community, there is a stigma on mental health. People are scared of kind of losing their deployment status. And in particular, traumatic brain injury, which is now endemic after kind of 2 decades of war, is a really serious issue, which of course leads to post-traumatic stress disorder and other things. So ultimately, it's something that we found that there was a niche that had to be filled, where there are a lot of providers who are willing to provide or willing to give mental health care. To veterans or to military service members, the intelligence community, but this is something that's anonymous, and that's really important.
Yeah, it's very clever, because so many guys are afraid of losing their security clearance. Like that guy Michael Frody that I recently wrote about, who was in a secret DoD unit, took his own life. He was definitely one of those people who was afraid that he was going to lose the job that he fought so hard for.
And people say that, and so when and it's interesting. So Williams' brother-in-law, Bill Mulder, so he was from SEAL Team 6, but he actually did a rotation in the intelligence community, and he actually worked for me years prior. And the story is so incredibly tragic, and you talk to Sydney, his widow. Here's someone who was on the tip of the spear, but really struggled tremendously with serious issues after 2 decades of war, and openly stated to Sydney, before he took his life, that he could not get help that he needed because he was worried of losing his deployment status, his clearance, his ability to kind of stay with his brothers in the fight, because there's this stigma, because PTSD and TBI is this, it's a silent injury, and it's devastating, but it's not a gunshot. It's not something you can show visibly to your comrades. And so the idea is to have a mechanism on your phone to allow for anonymous healthcare, which I think fills a tremendous niche.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do is kind of promote this throughout the special operations community, certainly through all the various foundations, for retired veterans. I mean, the statistics are awful. I think it's 17 veterans a day commit suicide. I mean, that's a number that blows your mind. That's a terrible thing to say. But
I worked on a story about the Delta operator Billy Levine, who shot and killed his best friend Mark Leshikar, and then Levine unfortunately turned up dead in a training site on Fort Bragg.
Right.
He made comments to Mark's sister, not outright saying he needed help but couldn't get it, but kind of beating around the bush and saying, the people who really need help in the unit aren't getting it because that he felt like they weren't taken care of, or that there was a stigma behind it. And I've just encountered this so many times in stories I've worked on that I think this fills a real need for people. Yeah. And how many guys who have wound up dead one way or the other that this could have helped. One
of the things that I found incredible when I went to Walter Reed, again to the TBI center, is that so you go there for the TBI program there, and it's really designed for the military. There are some agency folks, as I've alluded to, who have gone, but you go there every morning. You walk in there, and frankly, I didn't think I had an issue with self-harm, but every morning you walk in there, and the first thing they ask you is, "Did you feel that you were going to hurt yourself last night?" And I would always say consistently no. But at the end of the program, they bring in family members, and they brought my wife in, and I was stunned by what she had to say, and because they asked her, and you're there in front of your, and sometimes your kids are there too, and they said, "Did you ever worry about Mark taking his own life?" And she said, "Yes, all the time."
Wow.
And I was like, "What?" And so, and then we had, obviously, you're sitting there talking to psychologists on this, but there were so many signs or things that I did that really scared my wife. Now I'm still convinced I was not going down that path.
But you didn't know she was living with that either.
And so you're right. There's two things. One is she was worried about me, so maybe I should kind of reassess. But number two, right, she was living with that every day and really scared for me. And so just to have that ability to talk to folks, and the amazing thing about some of these veteran suicides, including Bill Mulder, he went through the TBI program. He went through NICO. He came out with tools that he needed, and still it didn't work. He didn't stick with stuff, which is what happens. As we were talking earlier today when we were grabbing a coffee is, you have to be dedicated and want to do this. And so obviously it's a company that's providing the service, we do a lot of fundraising, but it's really awareness. And so it's making veterans aware of this. If you look up on the internet, it's Sound Off. We'll
throw the links and everything in the
link in
description.
there. And there's Catherine Herridge of CBS did a great piece a couple months ago where they interviewed William and they interviewed Sydney, Bill's widow, and it's something I just want to kind of spread the word on. I feel passionately about it. I think the intel community needs it as well. Again, it's the same exact kind of stigma. I remember coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. You go and you kind of have your post TDY or PCS physical, and you do see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and how you doing? Great. Any nightmares? Nope, I'm all good. Meanwhile, I'm seeing dead bodies at night, and I'm waking up in a cold sweat, and all the things that I was really affected when I came back from Iraq, because that's what we do. We lie, and so that's what I did. I lied to every medical professional on some of these things, and so it's trying to find a way to get people help when they need it.
And so people can find this on whatever the iTunes app or whatever the hell, whatever program, Google Play.
There's an app store
Okay.
in terms of the app itself.
Yeah.
For sure, and it's really easy to sign up. As we talked about before, I think it would be a kind of a great future program to have William Negley on, to have Sydney, Bill Mulder's widow on, and even Mick Mulroy is now involved with this. My old colleague.
I want to do something on this for sure.
It's really important. It's the right thing to do.
It's sound-off.com, and it's available on iTunes, Google Store, and Android, everywhere you can find it. Sound-off.com, and there'll be a link in the description for anyone who's listening or watching later.
Here are some spicy questions.
Oh boy.
KT, ask Mark about his opinion about James Jesus Angleton going back in time with this.
So obviously, James Jesus Angleton, the kind of former legendary chief of counterintelligence for the agency, and someone who is kind of rife with paranoia. It probably caused a lot more harm than good. But I think the story of James Jesus Angleton is something that we should always caution on. Is that these are individuals who had gained kind of too much power, institutional power, and were in their positions too long. There's a reason why we are rotated in and out of jobs, and I think that that's something that the agency has to really take more seriously.
CI that's specifically a field where if you spend too long there, the conspiracy stuff in your head starts to mess with you.
So a perfect example. It's a hypothetical example. Is so let's say we try to recruit a Russian. And as part of the vetting process, you want to see what kind of information the Russian agent is giving us, and if it's bad, okay, it's probably a provocation. If it's good, and here's the thinking: if it's good, well, okay, he still might be bad because the Russians are feeding us information that's good for now, because down the line they're going to at some point deceive us, and so that's the kind of wilderness of merge. You're going to go crazy over time. Because you can have an agent who is providing rock solid information. Maybe that agent is even telling us which spies the Russians have recruited in the U.S. government. But no, the paranoid CI person would be like, well, they're going to give up one of their spies because they're going to protect someone who's even more important.
You think you're playing chess with the Russians, but at a certain point, you're playing chess against yourself.
And so that kind of stuff is maddening. I mean, the way you kind of you obviously have to always kind of vet and test your agents, but that kind of thinking is unbelievable. And you see this in your careers amongst folks, and then you're thinking, you've been in the CIA game a little too long. I mean, the agent is providing good information. But no, he or she is still bad because ultimately there's an ulterior motive, and that's when you're getting a little nutty. I mean, if you think about that, how do you trust your spouse? How do you trust your kids? I mean,
right.
You're going to make yourself crazy over time.
Here's another little spicy one. Is there any significance in the fact that Trump's first wife, Ivana, her whole family was in the Czech KGB? I don't even know if that's
it's
true,
true or
folks.
not. Yeah.
I can't fact check that right now.
I'll stay away from that one.
Yeah.
That's good, though.
Because that's another CI. We'd start mind fucing ourselves on things like this real quick, right?
So what's interesting though is that it's as we're talking about that question of kind of recruiting a diverse workforce. And so, and we're talking about Americans, but what about? And so here's where CIA really has to kind of, I think, get out of the 18th century. Is look, I was born in Greece. My wife was born in Lebanon. Both of us were CIA officers. So immigrants and people with extensive foreign overseas ties and backgrounds, maybe they're to China or Russia, other places like that. That actually, those are the people we need, because they bring cultural understanding, bring linguistic understanding. But on the security side, there's always this kind of crazy suspicion. And again, so that's something I think that CIA has grappled with. I don't think we're there yet, but we have to. You got to, and maybe you're taking some chances, but you know what? We need a Chinese American. To be a case officer, or a Russian American who speaks the language already, who knows the culture.
Do you think those people are, I mean, this is sort of like a racist comment, but it's also something that we kind of have to talk about, or at least acknowledge. Is there an increased threat of, let's say, a Chinese American being flipped by the Chinese intelligence services?
I think you got to look to see what, if they have family back in China. But I would actually, but every situation is unique. But I'll tell you, for my situation and some of the other folks I know, we have a whole bunch of Arab American officers. The immigrant experience is really interesting, but oftentimes I would find immigrants more patriotic, more loyal to this country because they came here for a reason.
Right.
I joke around my wife all the time. Like, my wife's family is like to the right of Attila the Hun. And they are America can do no wrong because they fled Lebanon and came here, and they have been so successful here. So I think everything's different. Look, if you have if there's family members who remain in Russia or China, that's an issue, because they could be subject to pressure. But every case is different. But these are the people that we really want. I mean, again, it's that kind of diverse workforce. And for a long time, the kind of security folks would give these folks a hard time.
Oh my gosh, more questions. Okay, I'll try to start wrapping it up here. Mark, thank you for the CIA golf balls.
There you go,
here.
collector's item.
This come out of the gift shop?
Well, I have access to, as a retiree, I have access to the gift shop. So yes, I buy some golf balls to give to my friends.
Yeah, thank you.
You can sell it on eBay. When I get really pissed at the agency, I'll take it out and I'll hit that ball hard so it gets my aggression out.
Mark, one more question. So the UBL raid, there was a walk-in.
No,
right?
Stop it. No, the good thing about doing this on starting at 12 is that there's no drinking involved. Is I don't have to wake up tomorrow and say, "What the hell did I say?" and go into a panic. What did I tell Jack and Dee? Oh my God. It's always fun to see you guys.
Yeah, man. Like that show we did a couple episodes back with Andrew, like the last hour, I don't really, like, my recollection's very fuzzy of what actually happened.
I just saw you tweet something out. This went off the rails. Degenerated totally. Yep.
Very much did go off the rails. We had Andy take his shirt off. Thank God, we've been trying for years.
Male nudity on the show. Okay, what is Mark's opinion about Michael Flynn?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm happy to share that. I think Michael Flynn is an absolute. So this maybe some of your listeners will be upset by this or not, but I think he's an absolute traitor to the United States. Here is someone who occupied one of the highest intelligence positions in the U.S. government as director of DIA. He's completely gone off the rails. Started early after his retirement when he shows up at a luncheon or dinner with Vladimir Putin. It was involved in some crazy scheme to with the government of Turkey, being paid by them. But someone who is
Fired from the National Security Council after 2 days.
Yeah, but it was so off the rails now in his kind of conspiracy theory and mindset. I mean, this is not someone who's a supporter of a political party or position. This is someone who is kind of degenerated and is just some madness. Absolute madness, and it's a really sad story. And so I think that when you look at Michael Flynn and you look back to the time when he was in the war zones, and on the analytics side, they were pioneering some of the kind of fine fix and finish and using SIGINT and a lot of things we do really well, kind of in manhunting. But what he's degenerated into now, into this QAnon conspiracy guy. I mean, it's incredible. I can't look. I have friends across the political aisle. We were joking about before that I'll go on CNN or Fox or MSNBC anywhere, and so I made some of my political views known sometimes, but I'm uncomfortable in being kind of labeled to the right or to the left. Flynn is off the wall crazy, and I don't understand even some of my Republican friends who defend him in any way. I mean, this is absolute lunacy now. This is not saying you're a supporter of of
It's
a
not
party.
about conservative politics at all.
Not at all.
It's just batshit crazy.
And I'd love to go back to a time when people actually fought over issues. So what is the role of government now? So obviously, the Democratic Party has moved to the left a bit, and they're pushing big government programs. Republicans are resisting that. That's great. Let's have that debate all day. But the Michael Flynns of the world, I can't imagine anyone, any Republican kind of embracing him. That just makes no sense.
That we have these colonels and generals coming out of the military, and a few characters from the CIA.
Sure.
Who were like, stop the steal, the Dominion voting machines were hacked by
Insane.
Venezuela.
Yep.
I mean, do you think that's something of an indictment on these organizations, that these people are kind of promoted to the highest ranks?
It just triggers something. I'll tell you in a second. So the answer is this someone who has always had these kind of beliefs?
Or did it happen after
Or did it happen over time? And again, and let's go back to 20 years of war. Like, what has this done to all of us? But yeah, it's a little nutty. I mean, I remember you writing on this and tweeting about it, but certainly writing on it and talking about it. How extensive in the whole Stop the Steal movement, or on January 6th and QAnon. How many veterans were involved in this? That's to me, it's worrisome. I remember just fearful after January 6th that we would find out that some of my friends, were involved in the assault on the Capitol.
Some of my friends were.
Right, and that to me is deeply disturbing. And so the reason why I laughed is one of the things. Let's go back to the Havana syndrome piece. And so at some point, when we kind of dismiss a lot of the claims by CIA officers that they were hit by Havana syndrome, and some of the allegations were, okay, this is mass hysteria. And so one of my friends made a quip, is like, well, like, what the hell happened to our selection process? So basically, you're saying that 1,000 people are crazy. Or 1,000 people are suffering from some kind of illness. Well, how'd that happen? And so, I don't know. National security, establishment is made up of human beings, and so, we all have, we all have things that we deal with. If you bring it with you, from the beginning, or it happens over time. But boy, I see someone like Flynn, and this is someone who's just kind of just degenerated in a spectacular fashion. I don't think he was always like this. But he is just so off the wall now. I have a hard time having a rational conversation with some of my Republican friends who actually think he's still a kind of legitimate figure.
Do you think some of these folks who go down the QAnon rabbit hole, do you think it represents a national security threat?
Yeah, for
at
sure.
A certain point?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do, and I do think that kind of from that we have a serious domestic terrorist threat now. January 6th for me was a horrific day. I watched that. I was in total horror. I have friends who are on the Hill. Congressman Abigail Spanberger. She's a former CIA officer. She's a rock star. A moderate Democrat from kind of rural Virginia. She was texting me, from the floor of the House. Like, they thought they were going to die that day. She was an absolute, she was a hero that day as well, because having, she was a case officer. So she was going around telling everyone to take their pins off, the little pins, congressional, the pins that the congressmen and congresswomen wear, that signifies, who they are, because they were worried that if people, if the Capitol, if the floor was breached, that they would be kind of picked off one by one. That was a terrifying day. I watched that. And again, I'd served 26 years. I spent a lot of time in third world countries where this stuff does happen. Watching that was truly awful. And so I was definitely in the back of my mind, and you were writing and talking about it. I was like, I hope I don't know some folks, and the same thing. I know some people who are down there too, and I've had to kind of reassess my relationships, literally my personal relationships.
It's sad
with some of them.
It's really sad. It's heartbreaking for me, especially seeing not just QAnon, but how many people I knew, retired senior leaders in the special operations community, going down that road of the sort of conspiracy stuff. It's heartbreaking, actually. And it makes me, you have to reassess some of your relationships. And honestly, it also makes me reassess something about myself as well, because I came out of this same world. I was a true believer. What does it say about me that I admired these people so much? And I still, to this day, don't really know what to do with all of that. My team sergeant, when I was in Special Forces, he's in federal prison right now.
Right.
And I don't know what's going to happen to him?
Right.
You know, I had to cut him off like over a year prior because of some of the nutty stuff he was doing. But this was somebody like I was friends with him.
Yeah.
I went down and I visited him at his home. I met all his kids.
Right.
I mean, like it's not as clean cut as like fighting terrorism in the Middle East, where you're like, you know, this is like our friends, our family. These are like people we loved. What do you do with that?
And you know, you risk your life overseas with them.
Yeah.
And they might have, you know, done some, you know, heroic things to save you. In fact, but no, I mean, January 6th was an awful day. You know, but I think it's just in our world, you kind of wonder like how did people kind of go down that path, because again, it's not I like the folks I know who you know believed that somehow that was their patriotic duty to be down there and to storm the Capitol. And I didn't see this in them previously. Mm-hmm. I really didn't, and some of these people I knew quite well, and so yeah, it does make you.
Do you think that's something that happened to them in retirement, that they weren't really able to transition back into the civilian life?
Perhaps. You know, one of the worst things that you do in retirement is you sit around and watch too much damn cable television.
Yeah.
And you kind of get sucked into that world. And so, you know, so maybe, you know, you're the other thing too, that in our world of intelligence and special operations, it's a community. You have that sense of kind of brotherhood and sisterhood. You know, that you can see how people miss that, and then gravitate towards QAnons or these guys
to have a sense of community.
Facebook community. You know, to have that sense. Oh, look, it's the same grievance that maybe drove us after 9/11. Like, why did we do all those things for so many years and you know risk our lives and spend so much time away from home? Well, now they have another kind of, you know, piece of rage. Which is that the election was stolen or some kind of nonsense like
Something
that.
to fight against.
Something to fight against. You know, so they missed the fight, so they're back in it in some way. But you know, the scary thing is the anger and the passion. I mean, this is not me having a debate about you know what food stamps. I'm serious. You know, like a normal policy debate with someone who maybe I don't agree with ideologically. This is like off the wall shit.
Yeah.
And I mean,
It's irrational.
It's irrational. Scary.
This is kind of an interesting one. We touched it a little bit. Have you done any more research on the Russian interference in 2016? The best metaphor I have is trying to find a smoking gun. Like you smell smoke but can't find the gun. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
So, what you know? Then this we could have a whole episode on kind of the Mueller report and how that was not, I think, handled correctly.
Come back tomorrow.
I got to get back to Virginia. No, so here's, you know, the bottom line for me, and I'll give you just my personal experiences on this, and that's all I can do. You know, as I took, you know, my position as deputy ops chief in the Europe Eurasia Mission Center, you know, there was lots of swirl about this, but ultimately, what concerned me and many other people is that there were a ton of contacts between Russian figures, Russian nationals, and members around Trump's orbit. You know, I'm not an analyst. I didn't put together kind of the you know a PowerPoint or any kind of you know fancy you know algorithm on where everything fits. But there was so much there. I'll never forget, and you know I'll never forget watching TV and seeing you know kind of a what's it called, a chyron come across the bottom. Is that the right word? Chyron? Yes. D is nodding. And it was talking about, you know, a famous meeting where Jared Kushner, you know, went to, and I believe it was Kushner and Flynn, and they went to meet the Russian ambassador at the Russian embassy in D.C., and they asked to set up a separate communications channel, you know, with the Russian government. So that, you know, that splashed, and so I can talk about that because it was on the, you know, it was on the news. Crazy stuff. So there was you know there's so much there. So you know in terms of smoking gun or not, there's just a hell of a lot out there. I think that there was certainly enough to give people kind of a lot of suspicion on what the hell was going on. Again, you know, Michael Flynn and his contact, you know, with the Russians. I mean, and half these guys are now on, you know, commentators for RT, you know,
OAN
or OAN, and so. You know, I don't know. I hope that America kind of can move to a point where, you know, we can say, as we should say, which the law does say, that it is not okay for foreign governments to have any kind of, you know, part of our electoral process. I mean, I think that's something that's really important. And then, ultimately, there's no doubt after it was not only the intelligence community assessment on 2016, but also a Senate report, led by at that time a Republican majority in the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, which kind of detailed the incredible Russian interference in our electoral process, and so it's pretty grim time. It's probably the greatest covert operation in the history of espionage.
Influence operation.
The greatest ever.
Yeah.
Caused a staggering amount of disarray in the American kind of body politic.
I guess history will be the judge, but I have to think that the Russians were probably pretty shocked by how effective it was.
Yeah, it was amazing.
They probably did not expect all of this
Right.
attention on them.
Right. And so, you're 100% right. There's probably, champagnes, bottles popped and medals given out and, at SVR and FSB headquarters. And from everything I've read in the Mueller report and others, this was done on the cheap.
Yeah.
Nothing. We talk about our old covert action programs. In the billions. This was probably, far less.
Folks, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we go live. We will be back on Friday with a veteran of the Chilean Special Operations Community.
Wow.
So, a dude from Chile. We're going to hear some stuff that doesn't necessarily get talked about
Right.
very often. So we're excited to have him on Friday coming in. Check out our Patreon down in the description if you want to get access to bonus segments and bonus episodes like this. This one we made public, but normally they're behind a paywall. So thank you, everyone who joined us. And thank you, Mark, for coming in. Do you have any final thoughts? Anything else that you think is really important to bring up before we wrap up today?
No, it's great seeing you all again. Doing it in studio is far more fun.
Yeah.
I'll come back and we'll do an evening episode.
Yeah,
It can get derailed on the third hour.
I'd love to do
I want to
that,
see D
Mark.
take his shirt off.
Mark's book is Clarity in Crisis, a book about leadership with vignettes from your career.
Yeah, sure.
Where can people find you if they want to?
Sure. So I have a website, which of course is a link to the book, but also talks about all my kind of leadership talks and seminars that I give. It's marcpolymeropoulos.com. Pretty easy. I'm on Twitter at @mpolymer, which you'll find all sorts of crazy stuff, everything from dive bars to my view on politics.
Your
to
baseball stuff.
Baseball stuff. It's all over the place. It's certainly HarperCollins and others were like kind of begging me to stop tweeting stuff all the time, but I never listened. But it's authentic. It's who I am.
Off the cuff.
Off the cuff. But so it's usually Twitter, and then just anyone who wants to write me an email, it's marc.polymeropoulos@gmail.com. If you can, you can throw it up there. I get tons of kind of crazy people writing in, but also if especially folks who are interested in the intelligence community. I love kind of mentoring, especially folks coming out of the military or in college who are interested in a career in public service. I think it's
Cool.
still a noble calling, and so hit me up and I'll help you through the process.
That's awesome.
And of course, sound-off.com. It's available on all the the Apple Store and Google Play and all there. Check it out.
Yeah, so guys, we'll see you on Friday at our usual time, 8 p.m. in a couple days. Thanks for tuning in. And Mark, we'll